In the Southeast Asia region, there's a couple of really prominent people groups, the Khmer people group, and the Cham people group. The Thais, of course, were a very strong people group as well. In this region, back in the 9th, 10th, 11th century, the Khmer people group was actually a very dominant people group, very large people group. The Khmer dynasty during that period stretched over into what's current-day Vietnam, up into Thailand, across over some into Laos. And so the Khmer people group, the Khmer dynasty, was a rather large dynasty. And so a very powerful dynasty. You'll see at the end of the week, when we go to Angkor Wat, you'll actually get to see some of the architecture, some of the things that were built. During its period of time in history, it was probably one of the most prominent people groups in the world in terms of some of the things that they did. Some of the things that they did in that time frame were extremely, extremely impressive. So Cambodia's got a very proud heritage in that regard. It's had a very war-filled history. Even during that period of time, there was a lot of fighting amongst the Khmers, the Chams, the Thai armies during those points. So those kingdoms fought quite a bit throughout history. Fast forward, kind of talk about 20th century. The 20th century was pretty tough on Cambodia. After World War II, during World War II, the Japanese actually invaded Cambodia. It was actually came under the rule of the Japanese for a very short period of time. After that, again, the Allies, when they defeated Germany and defeated Japan, then they split those countries up, often colonized them, and so France came in as part of that. Cambodia was colonized by the French after World War I. It became a French colony, but Cambodia, again, Cambodians wanted to be free from colonization. They didn't want to be a French colony. They appreciated the French, the help that the French gave, the things that the French brought in terms of culture and development, but we wanted to be an independent nation. They did have a monarchy. The king negotiated for Cambodia to be a free country, be their own country, to govern themselves. So in 1953, France gave Cambodia its independence. There was no war behind that. It was an agreement between the king and the French. Cambodia became an independent nation. The French were still very heavily involved. Stayed had a lot of investment into Cambodia, so they stayed involved in Cambodia through those years. If you were to come to Cambodia in the 1960s, Phnom Penh would actually probably be nicer. It would actually be much nicer than it is today. It would actually be, relative to the time period, it would actually be more developed in the 1960s than it is today. Again, relative to the time, but it actually, the education system would be better, the medical system would be better, pretty much in every aspect of culture and life and government. Cambodia would have been better in the 1960s relative to the time than it is current day. You guys, all of us, probably familiar with the 1970s, that period of time. 1970s, late 60s and early 70s, brought on the Vietnam conflict. And with the Vietnam conflict, you had, with that conflict, Cambodia is right next door. There were a lot of dynamics happening. Every government in the world kind of focused in on Southeast Asia for that period of time. You had communism. At that point, you had the ultra-communists and you had the ultra-democracies, and both were vying for Southeast Asia. Unfortunately, both of their approaches to come in and deal with Southeast Asia weren't positive ones. Okay, they kind of came in and tried to infuse money or infuse military help, and it kind of aggravated the situation regionally. The communists were trying to take parts of all the different countries in Southeast Asia, and there were countries wanting democracy in all of those areas as well. and it created conflicts. Vietnam was going on, and just to kind of give you an idea, Vietnam was happening. All of that wasn't supposed to be coming over into Cambodia, but it was. The Vietnamese were leaving Cambodia. Their forces were leaving Cambodia. They'd bomb or raid, and then to avoid the American, Australian, different forces that were helping the Southern Vietnamese, the Vietnamese forces would leave and come over. They could come fluid. The border was very fluid, so they'd come across the border to hide. So they go in, attack, go across the border into Cambodia and hide because those forces, American forces, Australian forces, different forces, were not supposed to come over into Cambodia. Cambodia was a sovereign nation, so they weren't supposed to come over. But they found out soon the Vietnamese were crossing the border, so they said, okay, if the Vietnamese are going in, then we'll just bomb over in Vietnam, and bomb over in Cambodia, bomb the Vietnamese forces that are moving into Cambodia. So you had the Vietnamese who were coming into Cambodian territory. They of course were doing things in villages that they weren't supposed to when they came across the border, raiding and doing things. Then you had the American forces who were bombing Cambodian territory, trying to bomb the Vietnamese, but they were also bombing Cambodians. So again, both sides were at fault. But what did it do? It destabilized Cambodia. What you had in Cambodia, the Cambodians were like, look, we have the communists, and they're trying to convince us to help them. We've got those democracies that are trying to help them, and in a society like society just like any other, you had people that wanted to go both ways. So that conflict was destabilizing what was happening in Cambodia itself. It destabilized the political culture in Cambodia. There was a democratic government that was funded. There was an election that was funded. Democratic government was funded. That displaced the monarchy. When that displaced the monarchy, then that upset the king. And so instead of being culturally sensitive to how they introduced democracy, it just came in. That upset the king. So the king was not happy at that point with the way that things were done. That in and of itself in Cambodia destabilized again. So you had all of these forces, everyone thinking they were trying to do good, but at the same time kind of didn't do it in a culturally acceptable way, and it completely destabilized the country. Also, everybody was kind of ignoring Cambodia, what was going on in Vietnam. Everybody was kind of using Cambodia as a pawn to either infuse more communism or infuse more democracy into the region. But all it did was destabilize Cambodia and create a worse situation in Cambodia than was going on, than was happening in Vietnam. So, in the midst of destabilization, up pops a local group led by a man by the name of Pol Pot, a group called the Khmer Rouge. In the midst of this vacuum of leadership, Pol Pot comes in and says, look, we're going to run the Vietnamese out of the country, we're going to run the Americans out of the country, we're going to get rid of all of these different Western influences and communist influences that are trying to destroy our country.
Yes, ma'am.